Where in Scotland are you, Matthew?
I'm in Edinburgh. So
Edinburgh. Okay, very good. Matthew Asprey Gear. And, of course, podcaster and filmmaker Peter Rinaldi is coming from the Upper West Side of Manhattan.
Upper West Side, and I'm very happy you invited me to this discussion, Adam. I'm a big fan of your show. By way of introduction to Matthew, I think I should say to Matthew, Adam's podcast is basically the grandfather of New York film podcasts. My podcast is like the hot grandson.
That is sexually confused.
I'm new on the scene. He's laid the groundwork here. That's why when I had this idea of you as this exciting author fitting perfectly on Adam's show, and of course Granddad was nice enough to invite the grandson on to talk too. So I feel very, very honored by that. Thank you, Adam. Good to see you guys.
Well, Matthew, as you're trying to make sense of all this, why don't I just say it's lovely to have you both on the podcast, and let's give a very short backstory of what brought us together, and that is that, Peter, you brought to my attention that there was a new book, a monograph, if you will, called Moseby Confidential, which is specifically about the movie Night Moves, which was directed by Arthur Penn, and that you were excited about it, but because you do a podcast with actors...
Yes.
So I'm told that, and I said, well, I have a solution. I love bringing on authors. We'll do it together. You'll co-host the episode, or we'll do it. The three of us will do it together. You coordinate it all, and that's what brings us all together. So thank you both guys.
And I just want to add into that Matthew was on my radar because he was in the sphere of a Welles net because of his last book, which was At the End of the Street in the Shadow. I forgot the name. At the End of the Street in the Shadow. Which, because of that awesome cover, which I never saw that Orson Welles photo. I'm a Welles fanatic. I never saw that cover. I was like, I want that book so bad. But I've read every Orson Welles book. Do I really want another Orson Welles book? Yes, I have. And this book, just to put the Orson... We're going in chronological order a little bit. He did the Orson Welles book first. That book was like the perfect book for Orson Welles fanatics to read after they've read every other book. That's the way I felt about it. I don't know if you like that assessment of it, but it's the Welles book for people who read every other Welles book.
Because it's more insider. It's more for the
he doesn't waste
fanatic.
time with going over the same thing again. He's approaching it from another angle, which was about the idea of the city and the idea of all. Welles is this globetrotter who really didn't just go places, he really took in all these places, and he made them a part of his films in this unique way, and it. So we learn about Welles through this angle. I don't even think we need Matthew here. You and Adam, me and you, Adam, can just talk about Matthew's.
Matthew, is Peter kind of correct on that? What do you think about your Orson Welles book?
I guess, it is a kind of study of Welles' filmography, and it even goes beyond the kind of recognized filmography to look at a lot of unfinished work, including a lot of screenplays that were never made into films, and a lot of films that he never finished making because of usually money problems. But it is, so it's supposed to be a kind of overview of the career, but there is this focus on how he films cities, which I think is... it really interested me, and it also was something that I think was really important to his work, because I think he loves cities, and he made films in cities all around the world, and I think he had something really interesting to say about the way cities are such an important part of the culture, and how power operates in cities, and so that was kind of the prism through which I approached his body of work, and which was a little different, I guess, than the way other people have written about his work.
Right.
That's right. It felt that way. And Adam, if I might ask you, I wanted to ask him a couple of questions about this book. Should I do that now? Is that annoying? Should we?
Orson?
Yeah.
No, yeah, let's continue to... we'll get to that, and I want to say that it feels like writing an Orson Welles book for any film writer seems to be almost a rite of passage, or Everybody,
Yeah.
It's like everybody has to write their Wells book. Why do you suppose that is? I mean, there's the obvious answer, but then there's a little bit more of a nuanced way of answering that, right?
I mean, my answer to that is, yeah, I mean, I obviously when I said...
I was asking Peter, but you can go ahead too. I don't mind your point.
Well, my answer is, yeah, there are lots of books about Orson Welles, but I mean, Orson Welles is one of the most, ambitious, interesting cultural figures of the 20th century, and he kind of ceaselessly worked through his whole life. And I think, there's so many angles you can approach his work from, and we're still trying to figure out really what he was even doing for many parts of his career. So,
yeah, there are things in this that I didn't know. Even though I read all the Callow books, you hit on some things in this that I didn't really. Maybe I wasn't taking it in the Callow book, and just his political ambitions or his political things alone can be volumes of books written about him.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing too is that a lot of the material that I drew upon, has only really recently become available because I do a lot of archival research, and I went to archives in Michigan and in Munich and in Indianapolis, and some of those archives have been available for a while, but there's always new things being available to scholars, and and it's truckloads of boxes of scripts and documents, letters, contracts, shopping lists. He just a wealth of paper, and also a wealth of celluloid. So just sifting through that stuff, you discover so much, and you just discover that every day of his life he was coming up with new ideas, some of which never really went anywhere, and others that did. And so, yeah, I don't really think he's really exhaustible. That's kind of the great thing about Wells.
That too. Now, Adam, I have a very salacious question to ask Matthew about this, and I the idea that I'm asking this on your show, I think you should be very honored. Okay, so I'm going to I'm prefacing it like this.
Not going to happen.
Okay. You're not going to be honored by this? I think you might. You don't even know what the hell this is. Matthew, somebody, I cannot say who, but somebody that I'm sure you know about, privately told me that when they were sifting through the Orson Welles archives, they came upon evidence that Welles fathered a child with Oya Kodor. Did you come upon that?
There's rumors.
Are you heading back to Indiana now that I just said this? Are you looking at Trivago right now? Whatever the site is that gets you the airplane tickets. All right, anyway.
No, I'm not. And you could just ask Oya, maybe. I mean, she's still there in Croatia, so she'd know. So, of course.
We have her on the Skype, but I couldn't figure out how to get a fourth line in.
Matthew, though, it's what's his name? It's the young man who she claims is his nephew. That's who his son is. Christopher Wells.
Yeah, I don't really. I don't have an answer to that. As far as I know, it's Oya's sister has a son, and the son was not fathered by Orson Welles, but rumors float around. So
this would be pretty crazy information. I mean, look. The other thing about Oya, reading the chapter on The Other Man, which is this unproduced screenplay, Adam, which Matthew claims is great, right? I mean, you actually say it's amazing.
Well, I think it would have made a really good film, yeah.
But maybe it's I don't know what it is. My feelings about Oya as an artist have declined over the past 15 years, I'd say. I remember when she came to America and brought Don Quixote, and she came to MoMA, and I remember I met her briefly there, and she seemed like a wonderful woman, and she seemed like, just seeing F for Fake, it seemed like they were so, and then this whole thing with Other Side of the Wind, this whole shenanigan she played just to get more money and to get, it feels like, and this idea that, like, she was the co-author of this Other Side of the Wind and everything. It feels like it's another person trying to like chip away at the Welles thing. You know, it's like, first of all, you know, it's like another person trying to take away his credits. But is any of that make any rational sense to you, or is that me just being some kind of weird misogynist asshole?
I mean, I've never had any contact with Oya, and but I will say, looking at the documents and looking at letters and so on, Welles was quite forthcoming in acknowledging her as his collaborator on screenplays in the 70s. So in my research, I haven't really found anything to disprove her involvement in some capacity. Yeah, that's sort of my answer. I mean, the screenplays that I've looked at that were never made, like, I mean, he wrote a screenplay, or rewrote a screenplay about the assassin of Robert Kennedy, and he also did, yes, The Other Man, which was an adaptation of the Graham Greene novel, The Honorary
What about
Consul.
The Other Side of the Man?
Sorry?
What was that?
The Other Side of the Man.
Yeah, I think The Other Man was because he'd done The Third Man of Graham Greene, and this was like his, well, let's call it The Other Man, because it is about another man. So The Honorary Consul is a good novel, and the screenplay that they wrote, I think would have made a really good thriller. So yeah, I mean, Oya, some people seem to dislike Oya, or kind of consider her untalented or whatever, or a bad influence on Welles. I mean, I know Welles was full of praise for her abilities. Definitely was trying to make her a star, because a lot of those screenplays that he was writing in the 70s always sort of have a role for Oya.
Yes.
But I'm wondering, really, at this stage, who's really who's trying to take away credit from Orson Welles anymore? The entire generation of old Hollywood producers and studio heads are long dead, and all the scholars and film historians and, you know, fans of Welles know that he's genius, know that he was responsible almost single-handedly for helping bring cinema into a more contemporary, modern, you know, phase.
I can answer your question.
But are there still doubters out there, or just or blank stirrers? You know what I mean?
Yes. Oya Kador and Jonathan Rosenbaum. Read your buddy Joseph McBride's interaction with Jonathan Rosenbaum about the authorship of The Other Side of the Wind. They're literally fighting about it as if he's Pauline Kael. I mean, this is like so you're like, who wants to do it? They do. You know, Jonathan Rosenbaum is so far up Oya Kador's Kador that it's amazing.
I'd rather you not.
That's your answer.
I'd rather you not say the name Kador again during the course of this
as a noun. Would you like me not to use that as a noun? You
could use it as a verb, but I just think the general film loving public,
yes, you're right.
i.e., subscribers to Criterion Channel, are where they hold Orson Welles as being godlike. I think there's an industry behind keeping this conversation going about Welles. I mean, I think he's largely looked at as an enormous influence on cinema.
Well, yeah, I mean, I would, there's debates been going on among, critics, champions of Welles, detractors of Welles for forever. And, I mean, Rosenbaum and McBride, they knew Welles, or at least their early days as critics were contemporary with Welles, and Joseph McBride knew Welles very well. He's an actor in The Other Side of the Wind. Rosenbaum met him. And they all kind of have their spin or interpretation of what Welles was trying to achieve, which is all fine. I mean, these debates go on. So I think they came of age as critics. They came of age as critics at a time when Welles wasn't considered a god by everybody. It was he was seen as a sort of somebody who peaked with Citizen Kane and had this very sad decline, and was sort of an embarrassment to himself. So they were very much involved in the 70s, really, in trying to make a counter-argument that Welles remained a vital creative force. And so, in many ways, they're still kind of fighting that fight a little bit. And,
Okay, wait. Before we move on to night moves, okay, because Matthew's going to be going to bed at 6 a.m. by the time we're done. Okay, listen. One last question about Wells. Okay, I had on my program Lee Grant. Adam is about to have on Lee Grant. She, Academy Award winning actress, but a victim of the blacklist. In her book, she goes into that quite a bit. But reading your book, I hit upon the part where Wells has this. I don't know why I never came upon this before. I guess I did because I've read the other book. Louis Dolivet. Is that how you say his name?
Yeah, Louis Dolivet.
Louis Dolivet, yeah. So he's this guy who is kind of like a producer, kind of like a financial person who Wells looks toward to get money from, and this guy loves Wells, but he's basically a KGB guy. A KGB guy. Wait, can I just read this one paragraph real quick? In fact, Wells' key political mentor, close friend, and future producer of his ill-fated Mr. Arkadin was Louis Dolivet, a secret Soviet agent. He was in the service of the French Comintern from 1929 and was also an operative of the KGB. Okay, so it goes on, basically what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to say this very delicately, though, because Adam and I got into a fight when I put up a thing on Ilya Kazan, and he said, "This guy named names. Fuck this guy." I was like, bro, it's more complicated than that. Everything is more complicated when it comes to the blacklist. There's people that had to name names. There's victims. There's people that feel bad about it. There's people all on all sides. Then there's people like Wells who ran away because they were coming after him. This was going to be a problem for him. If he stayed here, we don't even know the full extent of who knows if it would have been worse for him. I mean, to leave. I don't know. But the point I'm trying to make is, very delicately, isn't there some kind of point that this committee was making in a very bad way? Like, they're ruining people's lives. But Wells was actually basically being kind of controlled by this guy who was trying to mold him into being a member of the Communist Party, like in a according to the research.
Well, I would say I don't think anybody can control Wells. With the way that we've learned about how Russia can control a nitwit. Wells is far from a nitwit, but just the idea that somebody who needs something might not even know how these figures are controlling them until after they've already controlled them and shifted things. Trump doesn't even know he's being a pawn for Putin. And I'm just saying, this guy might have had his eyes on Wells as this kind of thing, because he's a smart person that at this time had political ambitions, but needed money to make his own movies. Do you know what I'm saying? I'm saying this started to open up a whole thing for me. Like, there was this kind of middle ground here. Like, they might have had their eyes on Wells. Somebody could say that and be very paranoid about this. But it's also, that might be real. Like there might have been, intervention might have been necessary there. Is this insane? I think the Dolivet angle, I don't really go into it in great detail in my book, but Francois Thomas, a French Wells scholar, has written quite a lot about their relationship, which was, a close friendship that lasted for more than a decade and then broke down when they were producing Mr. Arkadin. I mean, the story is basically Wells met this guy in the US in the early 40s, I believe, and he kind of was his political mentor in a way. But, I mean, I don't think Wells ever really was tameable by any institution or anybody. So, yeah, I mean, if Harry Cohn couldn't tame Wells, I don't think the KGB would have had much luck either. So, maybe that's a glib answer. But, they ended up in Paris trying to start a film company. I don't think Dolivet was really ever the source of the money. I think he was just trying to be a producer. And but their attempt to be collaborators for Mr. Arkadin was a total disaster for Welles. And I mean, Welles had very complicated relationships with his producers. So
Yeah.
But I think Welles was definitely a progressive. He was extremely bold and courageous in campaigning against racism in America in the 40s. So he's kind of quite fearless at that stage. And he was writing a newspaper column in the middle of the 40s. So he did have political ambitions for a time. Whether he was running away from the McCarthy era or not, it's difficult really to say. I think he had several motivations for going to Europe in 1947. He probably definitely would have been a person of interest in that period if he'd stayed, because he'd had all these connections to different kind of front organizations. But I think the main reason that he went to Europe in the late 40s was because he wasn't finding any sort of artistic freedom in Hollywood. I mean, all of the films that he was making after Kane were altered by the studios in various ways. And so he went to Europe and kind of invented how to be an independent filmmaker there, and sort of working on the fringes of all these different national film industries. So, I mean, Dolivet and Welles, they went to Franco's Spain to make Mr. Arkadin. There's all kinds of strange political bedfellows involved in that kind of filmmaking. So, the Dolivet story is really interesting. But yeah.
Yeah, it is.
Kind of continuing relevance to today. I don't know if I have anything to comment on that. But
I'm probably making too much of it. Adam, thank you for indulging me in my strange Orson Welles questions. Now, Night Moves.
Moseby Confidential is the name of the book, and it's published by Jorvik Press. Here in the States, I would say that Night Moves is a relatively obscure 70s film.
Yeah.
And so, is it huge in Australia?
No, I wouldn't say it's particularly huge in Australia. I think it's
big in Japan?
Probably big somewhere, but we're hoping it's big in Scotland. Yeah, no, I think it's one of those films which has always kind of had a cult following, and I think that following's growing. But it's always been far below the kind of public radar when you compare it to other sort of iconic 70s films like Chinatown and so on. I mean, it's definitely something which fewer people know about, but it was a flop when it was released, and the reviews were not really particularly great, so nobody really paid much attention when it...
You're making a great argument for the book.
But, I think it's a kind of a secret window into the period, and there were a whole lot of reasons that I think it wasn't really well received when it was first released, but...
Wait, how did you come to it, though, Matthew? Were you just a fan of it all these years, or did you...
Yeah, I mean, I think I have to give credit to a friend of mine, a colleague of mine at Macquarie University in Sydney, Noel King, who is a big 70s New Hollywood expert, and he told me, go watch Night Moves. That's the film. And I saw it, and I really liked it, but it didn't make the hugest impact on me at first. It was really only after second, third time that I really started to kind of obsess me, which it seems to be what other people tell me. It's a film that really sticks in people's memory. It's a kind of haunting film. So, yeah, and then I guess the reason I came to write this book was, on a practical level, I just finished the Welles book, which was this, big, ambitious study of all of Welles' films. So I wanted to do something with a lot narrower focus. And Night Moves just gives you so many insights into New Hollywood, into the detective genre.
I really loved heading into this through the character of Alan Sharp, who I didn't know about at all. Embarrassingly, his name never mentioned ever to me ever in my life. Why? I don't know. I want to see his other movies that were made out of his scripts, and it just seems like a really interesting screenwriter, and the kind of guy that the kind of writer that we'll never see again, I think, in Hollywood.
His timing was really perfect because he went into Hollywood in the early 70s, really.
Perfect timing.
Yeah, and I mean, his films are the screenplays that he wrote. He wrote westerns and he wrote crime films. He had 5 scripts made back to back, original screenplays that he wrote on spec, which is almost unheard of. And they're not in any way, they're dark films. They're, I mean, most of them end with their hero being shot, dead. They're bleak stories. But he had a kind of ambition to really wrestle with American genre. And, so they're revisionist genre pieces. And yeah, Night Moves is the 5th of the first 5 screenplays that he had produced.
Sorry, Adam, I'm jumping in.
Please do.
Right?
No.
Thank you. And I went to School of Visual Arts in New York, and we had a class where it was professional film people came in to talk to us, a different one every week. An editor, a composer, a director, a cinematographer. And I appreciated it at the time, but when I say the names, it's going to be like, you idiot. What? Like, the cinematographer was Gordon Willis. The editor was Dee Allen. The composer was Michael Small. The director was Arthur Penn.
Not familiar with any of those people.
But I think that there must have been some kind of relationship that the school had with Arthur Penn, and that's why we got Michael Small. And Michael Small was a very nice guy. I did not like the music in this movie. I did not like, especially the part where we first see Melanie Griffith. Do you know what I'm?
Oh yeah.
I mean, do you know what I'm talking about? That music that's at that part.
Yeah, that's the weakest part of the score, I think. I do like the music, and I think it really does work. But some people don't like it. It's very much of its time.
Yeah, I mean, but what would you make of that particular part? The music during that particular part that sounded like it was some kind of a television show music or something.
It could be that it's stock music that was flown in. I really don't know. It's very different.
It changes the tone suddenly, which I don't know. Maybe he's going for that.
You're talking about the scene where Gene Hackman's driving behind Jennifer Warren's car. And
yes.
No, I mean, it could be that it's a piece of stock music that was just flown in there for some reason. There's a lot of mysteries about or questions that I still have about why certain decisions were made during production. Yeah,
and the real secret weapon, I feel like, in these movies, Bonnie and Clyde and Night Moves, and probably every Arthur Penn movie, is Dee Allen. I mean, I think that her work, especially at the end of this movie, the end of Night Moves, is so amazing.
Definitely the strongest section of the movie, in my opinion.
Yes.
And the sets were the best.
But it's all the editing. I mean, it's all the editing. I mean, it's a very. I'm sorry. I'm talking over people. I'm sorry. In your research, did you? And I think you go into it a little bit. Penn would come in and see some stuff that she was doing and just give some notes and go away again. He wasn't like a Scorsese type director working with an editor in the room all the time. Right?
Yeah, that's how he described the process. And I mean, Dee Allen had a lot of material to work with. The way that Penn shot the film was quite unconventional. I mean, he shot a scene from multiple angles, multiple framings. He did this on purpose because he wanted to have a lot of material to work with to change the rhythm of the scenes, as he said. And Dee Allen, yeah, she's a master editor, I should say, and I think Penn trusted her more than he ever trusted any of his screenwriters. What is interesting is that he never worked with, as far as I can tell, he never worked with a screenwriter more than once. He worked with Dee Allen first on Bonnie and Clyde, but then again and again all through the period, I think at least until the early 80s. And he was just full of praise for her and for their relationship, the collaboration, I should say, and what she brought to the film. So, I mean, I think he felt that they were the ones making the film in the editing room, and
Yeah.
He never seemed to have the same kind of relationship with the screenwriter. I think he almost seemed to seek almost a combative relationship with his screenwriters. That's certainly the case with Alan Sharp, because they had a big disagreement during the making of this film.
And do you want to talk about that? You're talking about the scene, the main scene that was cut, that was the big problem, right? Is that the biggest issue?
That's one issue, but I think it comes down to something a bit deeper than that. I mean, there was one scene that Penn ultimately decided to trim in the film. He didn't cut it out entirely. It's a monologue that the actress Jennifer Warren gives during the love scene, a kind of delirious kind of monologue about Robert Kennedy and so on. It's about a page in the script. Alan Sharp thought it was, the key scene in the movie, and Jennifer Warren was really upset when they decided to, when Penn decided finally to take it out. But I think it goes down to something deeper. I think Sharp went into this project with the idea that he was going to kind of tear down the archetype of the private detective hero, the macho detective hero who solves the case and wins the lady and all that. So he went out really with this attempt to kind of completely destroy that archetype. And Penn, I mean, at least in Alan Sharp's telling of the production, Penn went along with that. But at a certain point, he sort of seemed to have big doubts about what type of film he was making. And in the editing room, they started to tussle over who the character of Harry Moseby, played by Gene Hackman, was. So there were a lot of disputes about the tweaking that went on to kind of define the character in the editing room. And ultimately, Sharp walked away from it, sort of feeling that Penn had chickened out and had tried to make a more conventional type of detective hero. So yeah, they both left, and they both walked away from the production feeling that they'd failed in what they set out to do. Penn wasn't happy with the film, at least initially.
It's interesting. I'm sure he wrote it before. I'm sure he wrote the screenplay well before the release of Robert Altman's The Long Goodbye. But it just happened to be another film which took a very similar approach. And in a lot of ways, even though it looks a little bit better, I'd say, that film in general, and certainly Elliot Gould's hair survives a lot better than Gene Hackman's hair throughout the films. But just really don't know who was responsible for the hair. But it was at a certain point, it was getting to be ridiculous.
Well, ask Matthew, who was responsible for this freaking hair?
I know Bob Stein was the makeup artist. I actually would have to look up the hair guy, or lady. But yeah, it's the 70s. It's mustaches. It's big hair. It's Safari show.
And speaking of this, I have something to ask to both of you guys. This is not. You can edit this out, Adam. When I first saw,
I haven't even started to record yet.
This is a bigger question about neo-noir and what noir is and everything like that. Because when I first saw Jennifer Warren, it didn't even register that this is the femme fatale. Okay, the femme fatale placement in this film, in the neo-noir style. Because I wasn't attracted to her at all. Okay, now I know that sounds really shallow, but what I'm saying is that. Is it the 70s, and that is a really a certain type of female that is attractive enough to be the femme fatale in the neo-noir? It's the weirdest question ever. But what I'm trying to say is it took me another half hour, 45 minutes to realize that even he was into her. You know what I mean?
She says when he turns up, she says, down here she's a pretty good-looking chick.
Right.
He doesn't think so now, but stick around.
That's interesting.
Sharp was, he was really seeking to kind of redefine those archetypal characters we expect out of a genre piece. And with that character of Paula, he, she does fulfill the role of the femme fatale in the sense that she is deceptive. She is using her allure to lead the hero astray and to distract him from what's really going on.
I mean, this is why the movie is good. This is why the movie is good, because she doesn't lay right into that thing, and the whole idea that I had, it took a while to figure that out.
Every single person in that movie, in that story, is deceptive. Everybody's lying. Who isn't?
Yeah.
That's right.
Maybe Melanie Griffith's character is the only one.
No, she lies too. I mean, she doesn't say who the guy is.
His wife, all of his friends, all of his colleagues, everybody's lying to him.
There's a line in the film that it was in the script that was sort of a running theme through the film, but it was cut out in the editing room. But it's the truth is a lie that hasn't been found out yet, and that's the thing. I think Sharp was really, it's a very dark view of trust. Everybody betrays each other, and without this is a spoiler alert, but his final sort of discovery of the culprit is this completely unforeseen to him betrayal, because he just doesn't see, just like the chess player who
I was going to bring it up.
I
was going to bring that he has to play himself because nobody else is playing honestly with him, and it's like he's the only honest opponent he could find. I don't think that's part of the conscious thing that they were doing with the chess game metaphor or what have you.
It's very much of the time as well, because while they were making the film, the Watergate hearings are on in 1973, and there's this definite sense we see all across films of that era that. You can't trust anybody. Institutions are not trustworthy. The president's not trustworthy. There's this big decline in faith in the kind of, the foundations of the society, and I think that film really reflects.
And a collective lost innocence.
So Sharp and Penn used the Kennedy assassinations as a kind of metaphorical representation of that just general loss of innocence. So. Loss of hope, loss of optimism about where society could be going. It's just like the dreams have sort of been shattered. So, this is a very dark view of where America was at, and when it was finally released, because it wasn't released until the summer of '75, so it was there was in post production for a year and a half really. The mood had really changed, because by the time the film came out. Vietnam was over, the Nixon had resigned, and 9 days after Night Moves came out, Jaws was released, and the mood had changed. Yeah. So it's not surprising that people weren't really that keen on this very bleak view of things.
Here's a very strange question. I was watching it with my father on my second viewing, and my father said, "That's so funny that they just mentioned Alex Karras."
Oh, yeah.
I said, "Why, Dad?" And he said, "Because Susan Clark was in Webster with Alex Karras."
Well, they were married.
The weird thing is that they weren't married yet. They were married in 1980.
I asked her about that, because it's a total coincidence, because at the time she was married to somebody else. She wasn't involved with him. And she didn't even know about it, because she's not in that scene. But Hackman makes a reference. Hackman plays a former football player.
Right.
And he makes a kind of jokey reference to another, a real football player, Alex Karras. And as it turned out, years later, Susan Clark, the actress in the film, married Alex Karras, and he became a movie star, a TV star too. So it's just a coincidence. I asked her about that, and she was just like, "Oh yeah, someone mentioned that to me. That's totally bizarre." So yeah. It's just one of those things.
Oh, I was just going to ask you, so you talked to Susan Clark?
Yeah, no, I mean, the great fortune I had writing this book or researching this book was I was able to do really good, long, in-depth interviews with both Susan Clark, who plays Gene Hackman's wife, and with Jennifer Warren, who plays the sort of femme fatale, Paula.
So his two female lead. Did you talk to anybody else?
I talked to Arthur Penn's son, Matthew. And I spoke also to Alan Sharp's ex-wife.
His ex-wife? Uh-huh.
Yeah, Alan Sharp's ex-wife, she was married to him at the time he wrote the screenplay. So she gave me great insights into him as a guy. He's an extremely complicated character who had a very complicated life. So, talking to the two lead actresses in the film was really great, because they gave me a perspective on the whole process, their creative role in the process, and what it was like working with Penn, and Alan Sharp, and also what it was like being a woman in the film industry at that time, and the challenges with that. So they were great. They both loved the script. They loved the screenplay. They both kind of recognized that Alan Sharp had an insight into female characters that was very rare at that time. And so they...
Yeah, I'd say that the Susan Clark role I would consider that a supporting role in the film. Again, that's Gene Hackman, or Moseby's wife, who cuckolds him, I guess you could say, with an actor, I should say. I mean, the actor who portrays this character that she has an affair with, I'm proud to say, has done this podcast.
Harris Yulin.
Oh, really?
Harris Yulin has done the show. Yeah.
Well, I tried. Yeah.
It's funny because I've been wanting to have him on, and one night, as an aside, I'll just say it's a kind of a funny anecdote. I was obsessing over Harris Yulin as I do, and I looked him up, and he was listed. So I called him up on the. I would never normally do this, but I called him on his phone. And a woman answers, and she goes, "Yes, hello." I said, "Hi, is this the home of Harris Yulin?" And she goes, well, "Yes, it is. Who's calling?" And I said, "Well, my name is Adam, and I have to apologize from the onset that I don't normally do this, but I do this podcast." And she goes, "Well, he's just finishing dinner. Hold on, please." So the next moment, yes. I'm like, "Hi, Mr. Yulin. Hi, my name's and he goes, "Oh, well, just email me at this email." And he gives me an email address, and I said, "I'm very sorry to have interrupted you at home, and I will email you. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. I'm sorry." And so, I emailed. Nothing came of the email, but some time later, I had the opportunity, because of a film he was in, to finally get him on. And I told the story. It's very funny. He really seemed to enjoy it. And then that was in Austin, Texas. And then like a month later, I was walking on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, and he's standing on the corner.
Oh, wow. Small,
and I just I pushed him out of my way, and I kept going. But I thought, no, but I said, "Harris, hi." And he remembered, of course, and so it was pretty nice. So now I feel like I can call him back, and maybe he won't be as gruff on the phone.
Yeah.
Oh, I love all of his movies,
Well, I wish I'd been able to talk to him. I tried, but
what happened?
Well, I didn't get a response. This happens when you're. It is 45 years ago this film was made, and some people are still with us. Some people have passed away. Some people have kind of just vanished. But yeah, no, I did email him, but for whatever reason, he, maybe
not that we have to leave this on the show, but is there anybody else you tried to get other than him and couldn't, or just didn't want to get involved? We don't have to include this if you'd rather not. I understand it might be sensitive. Not
particularly sensitive. I sent out emails to everybody who I could think of, except there was one exception, Gene Hackman. And
well, that's what I was getting to. I just didn't know if you.
Yeah, no, I didn't approach Gene Hackman for several reasons. Firstly, he's retired, and he retired a long time ago from the film industry, and
must be like 20 years.
He's a very private person, and so I kind of wanted to respect that. And he's also very elderly now,
close to 90.
Yeah, he's 90 years old this year. Next year, and he had done a few interviews around the time of the film's release, and also we did an episode of that TV show inside the actor's studio with Penn. Penn was present during the talk, and the kind of revelations that came out of that, the sort of archival sources, I felt were probably better than anything I was going to get if I happened to speak to him. So sometimes, I didn't speak to everybody who's still surviving, who was involved in the film, but I was fortunate because there's archival resources. And actually, I have to give credit to my colleague Nat Segalov, who was Penn's biographer, who knew Penn very well. He wrote a biography, the kind of foundational biography of Arthur Penn. And, in the process of researching that book, he went and interviewed everybody, including people who are no longer alive, like Alan Sharp. And, with great generosity, he made those transcripts available to me. So, he used those, those interviews in his book.
Right. Obviously it would have been great to get access to Gene Hackman just because. But at the same time, this is a relatively slender work. It's not a sprawling book, so you weren't going for that kind of level of broad, coverage either. I don't know if it was necessary, but so it worked out pretty well, is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah. I felt like his insights, I mean, the things that he said, that Hackman said about working with Penn in sort of the archival interviews were really interesting. I mean, but Hackman's kind of famously reticent, and, certainly the stories people told me of working with him were a little, that was intimidating too, because, he's a serious guy. Susan Clark talks about, when she was filming with him, I mean, he was kind of, totally professional and incredibly great at the performance, but he was, he wasn't really like the kind of guy who'd hang out afterwards laughing and having coffee, and, he went back to his trailer. He was a very serious actor.
Right.
And so,
who's the actor? Wait, I guess I gotta look it up. That played Delia's mom. I thought she was phenomenal.
Yeah, Delia's mom. It's Janet Ward, who was an Actors Studio alumni. She died, I think, probably like 25 years ago, and but she's great in the role. She sort of has to, again, all these characters, they have layers. I mean, even people who are kind of despicable on the surface, their motivations seem despicable, kind of have this moment of, if not redemption, kind of dignity. Right. She seems like just the kind of the world's worst stage mother, or the world's worst, she's there for the money. And but then there is this sort of moment of ambiguity, shall we say, in her character. So yeah, no, she's great. And James Wood is
oh yes,
James Wood it's one of his early roles. I didn't talk to him.
Good.
I kind of not that disappointed, but he's only really has a small role. But yeah. There's a lot of interesting performances. There's also some performances which I think don't work so well. And the film...
you're getting at maybe Kenneth Mars.
Yeah, Kenneth Mars is a really gifted comic actor. And, you see him in What's Up, Doc, or, the Mel Brooks stuff. And he's great.
Right, doesn't belong in that movie.
It was a case of real miscasting.
He did do one movie with... I'm forgetting what the name of it... with Shirley MacLaine. It was like one of these paranoia kind of fantasy. I forget where they live in Park Slope, and there's a lot of crime all over. I forget the name of it, but it's a really good movie, and it's a case where Kenneth Mars actually stops performing for the camera and actually acts in front of the camera, which he doesn't do in Night Moves.
Yeah, Night Moves
I agree with
strange,
that.
And I actually think they cut out a couple of, at least one big scene that he was in. It's in the shooting script, but I think probably, I mean, just looking at the film, it's not a good performance, and I imagine Penn was trying to minimize his appearance on screen, and I'm actually surprised they didn't recast the role.
Is there another very strange question? Are we supposed to be allured by 17-year-old Melanie Griffith? I mean, yeah. It's very, very, very strange 70s kind of disgusting, weird, especially post-Me Too time. Very strange movie to watch and not feel uncomfortable about. And even with lines like this, Gene Hackman says, "I'm on a sightseeing tour." When Jennifer Warren comes in and says, "What's happening?" Hackman says, "Sightseeing tour," meaning that she's showing him. And then she says, "How do you resist?"
But that's all kind
of... And then the next line she says is beating yourself? And she's referring to the game. This is Alan Sharp is brilliant. I'm not saying, but I'm saying there's this series of things here. This is a 17-year-old girl, and then Hackman says at some point in the thing somebody says there should be a law, and Hackman says there is a law.
Yeah.
This could be all seen as this movie of this guy who is tempted by a Lolita type
girl.
It's
her stepfather who says that. You don't skirt over. It's actually it's Melanie Griffith, who's the 17-year-old girl. What's her name?
Deli.
Deli. It's her stepfather that says there ought to be a law. So it's she's being sexually molested or more than by her stepfather.
I think the thing to say about it is, Deli is she's 16 years old. She runs away and she's very promiscuous. And you do definitely get the sense watching this film that at the time there was just a different attitude to that kind of thing. I think if you look at other films released in the era, like look at Clint Eastwood's film Breezy or the film Save the Tiger, they both have very young, kind of hippie, promiscuous drifter girls as their characters, and they're both they're kind of written as
Jodie Foster in Taxi Driver.
Taxi Driver is a slightly different case, but in those two films, you have that kind of. It's sort of treated, the promiscuity of a very young girl is really treated as a joke, and also kind of as a sort of male fantasy.
Well, it's there's two levels to it. There's the character and how she behaves in the script as scripted, but there's also the exploitation of this young actress who's barely of age, Melanie Griffith. Right? Is that what you're getting at? That?
Yes, that's right. By the filmmaker, yes.
And cast in a role where she is exposing her breasts and completely sexualized.
Yes.
As opposed, I don't know what the solution is, but it's uncomfortable. It's an uncomfortable thing. But we are looking at it through
2019 eyes.
A different prism.
What I will say is that Sharp. I think Alan Sharp was, he really makes Deli into a believable character, and Melanie Griffith performs that character, with great skill. It was her first role. So on the level of the screenplay, I don't think the screenplay is really. It's not taking any easy. I wouldn't describe Deli as a sort of like a fantasy figure for the male viewers in the audience. I think Deli is a three-dimensional character, and she's quite, in contrast to a lot of the kind of cultural representations of promiscuous young women that you were seeing in films of the era. But as to the question of whether Melanie Griffith herself was exploited as a 16-year-old on the set, I mean, that's another question. She's never said that.
Yeah.
She's never said she felt that way, and
I'm sure she was happy to be away from the lions. What was that? I mean, that's her life. She was happy she was going to live.
She was being pawed at by an entirely different species.
But I would say I think the film is on Deli's side. I think Deli is kind of in a way the hero of the heroine of the film. I mean, she's kind of the heroic figure there because she's surrounded by adults who are just treat her in a terrible, exploitative way. And the film recognizes that. And I think, the one thing that the Harry Moseby character, the Gene Hackman character, does is he is kind of like the paternal figure that she needs. And he does kind of act in a knightly way, a chivalrous way.
Yes.
With her, he doesn't... he does take her seriously, and... So the way that relationship is written on the page, I think, is one of the big achievements of that screenplay.
Yes. But not to beat this dead horse, but there is another moment later on the boat after Deli comes back aboard and is naked and is being. If you watch it, I mean, she's being wrapped up by the two of them. Basically, what I'm saying is. It feels like you could read this in one way, like there's a threesome coming, and then the threesome happens on that boat, and the Jennifer Warren forces her to drink this weird thing, and she actually says "good girl," it's like it's really weird, like and she's naked and they're hugging her and like they're watching her swim naked and making jokes. Then she has that thing. They come up. They're hugging her. They're trying to make her better, and they put that liquid down her throat. I mean, this is all weird. It's fucking weird.
No, well, I think what happens in that scene. I mean, she's sort of like almost drowning, and they fish her out of the water.
Yeah.
And probably what Jennifer Warren was giving her was brandy or something.
She was freaking out, and they wanted to sedate her a little bit. They wanted to calm her down.
I know, but why would you have the line "good girl"? I was so annoyed before I read the book and saw the movie with the Romer line. You know, the Romer. I'd rather watch paint dry or something like that.
Yeah, Gene Hackman says, he's invited to go see My Night with Maud by Eric Romer, French New Wave, and he says, yeah, I saw a Romer film once. It was kind of like watching paint dry, which is supposed to tell us about his, attitude to culture.
And I'm so happy that in the original screenplay, it was Claude Chabrol. And somehow Penn thought that made no sense and changed it to Romer? I mean, has he seen My Night with Maud?
Well, I'm sure Penn was a big fan of Romer, and
you do? Wait, you think so?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Penn was not. This was not supposed to be representative of Arthur Penn's
That's
view
true.
of the French New Wave at all. He was inspired by the French New Wave. I think this was the way Alan Sharp wrote it with the reference to Claude Chabrol. He was picking a foreign language film. As a point of discussion. But I think Penn made the right decision because Chabrol was the director of thrillers.
And a little bit, that's a little bit of it.
He's kind of like the French disciple of Hitchcock. And I think with Romer, I love the films of Eric Romer myself, but, they're films of people talking about relationships and, philosophy and to somebody like Harry, who's a football player turned private eye, he really doubles down on his kind of persona as a redneck. And if you read how that actually plays out in the shooting script, there's much more to it than you kind of finally see on film. His wife is an antique dealer, and she's kind of a highbrow, and Harry feels basically that she doesn't respect him. So he kind of just decides to, all right, if you think I'm a redneck, I'll be a redneck.
Yeah. Right.
So there's that kind of undercurrent running through the script, which Penn kind of cut down a fair bit.
Right, I guess it could have used a little bit more of that to help us with to understand his problems with the relationship. There's a moment when Jennifer Warren is dancing with the gentleman who played Deli's father. Tell me his name.
His name is John
Is that
Cole,
the worst dancing of two people ever in a film that's not a comedy?
It's terrible, and it's bizarre. And I was
very
talking to
bizarre.
Alan Sharp's ex-wife, Liz, who was really helpful, and she said, she's not even really that familiar with the film, and she's probably not seen it in 40 years. So she said, these ideas all came from a big road trip that she and her husband at the time took in 1968, and they're in the Florida Keys. They met a woman named Paula who inspired the character, and Liz says, there was this weird kind of affair going on between that woman and someone else, and then in the middle of the dinner, they just got up and started dancing around the room in this weird way, and she wasn't saying that even in reference to the scene as it was filmed, and this was her memory. So, I mean, this is just something that Alan Sharp saw, this weird behavior, and he said this has to go in the script.
So I blame Arthur Penn for not directing that dancing properly.
Yeah. Well, I don't think they're supposed to be. I think this is a kind of bizarre scene. Yeah. They're also reacting. I mean, they just found a dead body, and they're reacting.
Yeah, they act a real weird way to that.
And this is where, Hackman doesn't get it. His character just sees these people and he's like, who are these strange people? He doesn't understand.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of strange choices made or offbeat choices made in Arthur Penn films at some point. There's, if you look at Little Big Man and All of Alice's Restaurant. But if at the same time, this is a messy movie, and I've started to really value the messy movie, and I think there's something about this overreaching and, taking risks that don't always pay off exactly right or as intended potentially. There's something about this movie which the messiness of it, structurally, tonally, kind of pays off. Yes. I don't, that I think.
I agree with that.
In lesser hands, maybe it would have been unwatchable.
The more movies are, the more even small movies feel like they have to be tied up so tightly in formula.
Neatly.
Going forward, the more these movies are going to be gold, the more these things are going to just rise in value. These movies. I mean, why people aren't making movies like this in the independent golden age that this should be baffles me. These tiny little things about people like this, and
I don't know. Night Moves and a lot of other films released in that period are really films about failure, and. You look, Chinatown's about failure. The Long Goodbye is about failure as well. And, it's hard to sell a film as, this is not about triumph. It's about somebody failing. And, that's probably why people like us love these films, because it actually gets into very murky moral areas and, it gets into... It gets into the genres that we love, but it starts to kind of unravel them and question the kind of founding myths. And Alan Sharp was doing that in the Western as well,
Right.
So that's what makes it a kind of interesting era. But I don't know, it's hard to make that kind of thing today.
The name of the book is Moseby Confidential, Arthur Penn's Night Moves and the Rise of Neo-Noir. It's written by Matthew Asprey Gear. And again, it's available through the Jorvik Press. Easy to find. You can purchase it where books are purchasable.
I recommend people to watch the movie, read the book, and then watch the movie again, in that order.
What do you recommend, Matthew?
I'd definitely watch the movie before you read the book, because it's hopefully something which adds to the experience of watching the film and gives the kind of background to how this strange film came to be.
Yeah,
because it's.
And just buy the Blu-ray, because it's like $15 on Amazon right now. And I was like, am I going to buy? Like, I don't want to buy Blu-rays anymore. Unless they're really canon stuff that I'm going to watch over and over. And I'm so happy I did.
Or wait 5 years for the 50th anniversary release.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the Blu-ray it's bare bones in the sense that it doesn't really have any new special features, which, in a sense, is kind of like great for my book, because my book fills in that gap. But the transfer is gorgeous, HD, and it really shows you. It's a perfect transfer. It's gorgeous, straight from the negative, I think. So yeah.
Oh, should we let Matthew go to sleep?
Thank you so much. Great to talk about the film. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, great.
Great.
Thank you, Matthew, for your patience and your participation. We will do it again soon.